Good morning, Clear Creek. This is a great place to be, and I'm not just saying that. I really believe it, and that God is at work at this church just on a constant basis. Well, we're getting toward the home stretch of this series, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise, and if you haven't been here before, we're attempting to talk about how our spiritual health is affected by how we're wise with the resources that God has given us, especially the wealth that God has given us. And as we've studied this, we've really talked about the fact that we're all wealthy and that we're in the upper 5% of the wealth in the whole world and all of that. Last week we talked about some obligations and how that we have really got to believe in this message, and this is a symbol of that. And this week we're going to get into something called generous obedience.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can't go on? We can work it out. We can work it out.
You'll never guess where I got that video. From my wife. You know, sometimes it is about the nail. You know, sometimes when we want to talk about what's bothering us, and we want to talk about how disconnected we feel, and the truth is when someone starts saying, you know, here's the problem. Oh, no, I just want you to listen. I'm not sure I really want to solve the problem. And you know, that happens in our spiritual lives as well. You'd be amazed how many times leaders of a church will hear things like, well, you know, I just don't get much out of worship. Or I feel just so disconnected and I just don't feel like I'm really part of the family. And then when you look at them and you say, well, are you part of a small group? Well, no, but that's not the problem. Let me tell you more about how I'm feeling. And they'll go on and they'll go on. And it's like, are you invested in the work? Are you volunteering in the work of the church? Are you serving others in the church? And the problem is that they want to tell you about, here's how I feel. The problem might be the nail. There might be a target specific issue that keeps them from feeling like they're part of God's family. Now, I don't know how many of you are. I don't know what goes on in your family, but I'm going to guess if you're someone here who has had children and you're raising children, you've probably been through this exercise because Melissa and I have been through this. You have children and you're raising them, and as they become raised in the family, what you do is you start giving them chores. You make them responsible for certain things. For our children, it was making their beds. That's where it started. We want you to make your bed and clean your room. And at some point they stopped, and we're not sure when that happened. But we want you to do that. Now I want to ask you as a parent, why do you do that? And let's look at the action. Why in the world would you have this little kid make up a bed and it look horrible? You could have done it so much easier yourself, right? You could have cleaned the room in half the time with half the effort, and it took you a lot more energy to make your kid do it than if you had done it yourself. So why? Because taking ownership of cleaning that room and taking ownership of making that bed and that daily routine that comes from being a part of your family allows them to know that they're part of something larger than themselves. It builds an ethic within them, and what all these things together do is it creates with them this discipline. It creates a work ethic. It creates with them a discipline. And when we start talking about our wealth and what we do with our wealth, we have to understand that what God is doing with us when He tells us to give back to Him, it's not that He necessarily needs the money, but it creates within us this investment and this discipline, a spiritual discipline that causes us to grow up to be part of something bigger than ourselves. It causes us to create room in our lives for the Spirit of God to work. In the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 16, the Apostle Paul writes these words to this church at Corinth. He says, now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches in Galatia, and we're going to stop right there, Andy. What he's saying is he's saying, I want you to, there's collection, there's money, there's issues going on here, and there's another church that I've already commanded to do this, and this is the inspired word of God. As we continue, as I've commanded the people in Galatia, so do you also. And then we go on, he says, on the first day of every week, each one of you should put aside and save, as he may prosper, so that no collection be made when I come. Now what he's saying is there is a discipline that needs to be a part of your life. As you are prospered from God, you should return to God. That creates this discipline. It makes you invested. It brings you into a bigger, or becoming part of something bigger than yourself. My question is this: why is it so hard? You know, I talked last week about the 5 P's of giving, that it has to be a priority and a percentage and progressive, that it needs to be painful, we should be sacrificial, and it also has to be something that's preventative. We give away to keep us from becoming proud. And when we talk about those things, we realize that it's really difficult to do that, especially if you've never done it before. The question we have to ask is, why is it so difficult? And the answer to that is, because our appetites tell us different. You see, we live as people that God created within us these appetites, this desire to have things for ourselves. And to sacrifice and to give away is counterintuitive to us. Because in order to do that, we have to do something that makes absolutely no sense to a human being. We have to tell ourselves no. Isn't that hard to do? I mean, especially if you really, really want something for yourself. Telling yourself no because you're part of something that's bigger than what that small transaction is going on is a really, really hard thing to do. As a matter of fact, restaurants bank on this. Now, I'm not going to make you raise your hand because this is embarrassing. You ever been to a restaurant and you sat there and you ate and you had a wonderful meal and you were really kind of waiting on the check and you're full, all right? Imagine you're full. And then the waiter comes to the table and they've got a tray with them. And on this tray are 10 different kinds of desserts, and they're all pretty. It doesn't matter if they're going to taste like a dirty sock. That doesn't matter. But they bring that to you, and what they have done is they have created in your mind a very natural response to appetite. They've allowed your brain to start tricking you. And here's what you go through. Many times people will buy desserts that are not hungry because they have seen this, they have this desire, and 2 things happen. Number 1, you have what's called impact bias. You look at this and you think how much happier you would be if you just had that. You know, I'm that way about pecan pie, man. I can't help it. You just look at that, and no matter how full you are, you think, man, I'm just going to be that much happier, and you overestimate your happiness. We do that in our society sometimes with cars. We do that in our society sometimes with homes. We do that in our society sometimes with other jobs or a lot of different things. We overestimate our happiness. And then the second thing happens that's called impact exaggeration. And not only do we look at that and we think, man, I'll be that much happier if I have that. Now we go into the next gear and we say, I'm going to be incredibly unhappy if I don't have that. We exaggerate the unhappiness and the response of not having this. How many of you have ever had a teenage child that wanted a pair of jeans and they'll say something like, well, if I don't get that, I will just die? You ever heard that? They didn't die. They weren't even at the point of death. Jeans have nothing to do with death, by the way. But that's that impact exaggeration. And we go through that in our lives when it comes to being sacrificial with God or keeping for ourselves. We go through that same thing, our appetites, the desire for more. See, God created appetites. The problem is that sin distorts appetites. In the book of Philippians chapter 3, Paul warned against this. And it says, brethren, join in following my example and observe those who walk according to the pattern you have in us. For many walk, of whom I often told you, and now tell you even weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ. Those are big words, by the way. Whose end is destruction. That's even bigger. And then he says this, whose gods are their appetites, whose glory is their shame, and who have set their minds on earthly things. Here's what he's saying here. He's saying, there are people that have become enemies of the cross because they have such a small vision with such a small God. Their God is themselves. Their glory is in their shame. They love earthly stuff. They're worldly people. And so as we set up this straw man, so to speak, about, we are people who are controlled by our appetites and that we are to be people who are disciplined, that giving back to the church and giving away is a spiritual discipline that enables us to know God better. So how do we fight that appetite? How do we become people whose gods are not their appetites, but whose gods are the God, Jehovah God in heaven? And so I want to look at a couple of checkpoints here, and we're going to spend a lot of time in the book of 1 Timothy chapter 6. If you want to turn over there, if you have your iPads, iPods, Bibles. I like a Bible. You don't have to plug it in. That's where we're going to spend some time. First checkpoint, spiritual checkpoint that will allow us to guard ourselves against our appetites is contentment. Now, I've shown this video here before, but I think it is one of the best videos I've seen that speaks about contentment. It's about a practical joke that Owen Wilson, a movie star, played on another movie star by the name of Woody Harrelson.
I heard a hilarious holiday story. Was it Christmas that you were there, Owen, at Woody's house?
I was over there for Christmas. I had to go get something Christmas morning before I went out to my house. And when I was there, you guys were just starting to open presents, and you were saying, oh, just hang around for a little bit. And I was like, well, I got to get going. No, come on, stay. So I watched you guys open some presents, and then I had an idea, and I excused myself, and I went out like I was going to my car and ran around the house to Woody and Laura's bedroom, into the closet, and went into Woody's closet and just grabbed some stuff and put it in a bag, and then ran back around, and then came in, and I was like, I got a Christmas present for you. And you were like, what? Dude, I didn't even get you anything. I go, it's not about that. I just wanted to get you something. And he pulls out a sweater, and I said, no, I wasn't sure about your size. You might want to try it on. And he puts it on. It's like a hemp sweater, Laura. Look at this. It's perfect. Now, your shoes, I don't know about this. And then when he put the shoes on, he was literally jumping like a kid, going, they fit perfect. And it literally, he did not know. And then I went back around and got more presents. And this time I didn't even bother getting stuff that looked new. I just got some stuff and threw it in there. Go back around. Now you're almost in tears. Like, I can't believe you got me all this. And you put on a shirt, and this one doesn't even look very clean. You're like, now, dude, this looks familiar.
It took like 22 items before I got one.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
And I said that I gave him the most important gift of all, appreciating what he already had.
Oh, that is so beautiful and so true.
I think that is the most important gift of all, and that is appreciating what we already have. And when we talked about contentment, as Paul writes to this young preacher, Timothy, he really drives that message home. And in 1 Timothy chapter 6, in verse 6, he writes these words. He says, godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied with contentment.